Well, if any of you guys have been to any of like our soul winning nights, you'll know that we've had a few lessons on keeping your testimony under like 3 minutes or something small like that. That's not one of those testimonies, okay? It might take a little bit longer than that. Also, yeah, I'm going to preach. Everyone turn to Proverbs 25:24. I'm just kidding.
I'm ready.
Don't do it. That is a fun little verse if anybody wants to look that up. Also, I might cry, but this is just a disclaimer, not necessarily because bringing this up is like just so sorrowful and woeful to my heart, but just because I'm pretty nervous.
Thank you for your honesty.
So I grew up in a Christian home. I'm really grateful for that because I know a lot of people weren't blessed with that opportunity, but we were living in Colorado at the time, and where I live is going to be important for later, so I was in Colorado. And I was 8 years old in Sunday school, and I remember our pastor's wife taught Sunday school, and she was using the example of the wordless bracelet. Do you guys know what that is? Well, she was using the example of the wordless bracelet, but she was using crayons, like red is the blood of Christ that covers the black, that is your sin, and it makes you white as snow. And that's when I really understood what all these church language that had been, I grew up in the church, so I hear the gospel all the time, and I was hearing things like that. But it wasn't until I heard the example of the wordless bracelet or crayons that I was like, oh, okay, that's what that means. And I fell under a really heavy conviction. So Sunday school finished up, and I went upstairs into big church, and I don't remember what the pastor preached on. I just knew that during invitation is when people went up to get saved. So I was just like, oh man, I can't wait till that time when everyone's quiet so I can get saved. And so finally the invitation came, and I knelt in the pew, and I asked the Lord to come into my heart and save me from my sins. And I was just so happy. I was just so happy that later on that week, I was running and singing and dancing around the house. I'm saved. And my mom's like, what did this happen? Okay, let's talk about this. So she sat down with me, and we went through passages in the Bible, and she explained, salvation, all its facets, and I understood everything, and what baptism was. I don't remember how much longer after that. I remember sitting in church, and I was waiting for that time again, at the end of the service when everyone's quiet and there's music. I was going to go up and ask the pastor if I could get baptized. So that time came, and I remember holding on to my mom's hand, and then I was like, I'm going to do it. So I let go, and I just went up to the front, and I was like, Pastor, I want to be saved. He was like, where's your mom? And I was like, oh, she's back there. A reoccurring theme you might notice is that I make a lot of really big and important decisions without keeping my parents in the loop. So I went several weeks later, I got baptized. This is kind of a strange side part that's also very important. My dad retired from the military a couple years after I got saved. I was 8 years old. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. He retired, and he needed a job, and he was applying a bunch of places in Colorado because that's where we wanted to stay. But randomly, he did not even put in an application in Virginia, and some dude from Virginia was like, hey, come take this job. And so my dad was like, yes, let's do it. So we moved out to Virginia. Again, that'll be important for later. So fast forward to my teenage years. I was wondering what the Lord wants to do with your life, because it's the second year in high school. Everybody is like, so what are you going to do with the rest of your life? And it's really overwhelming, so I was praying. I was like, Mom, what do I do? And she's like, just pray. Pray, ask the Lord what he wants you to do with your life. So I was praying and praying and praying. And at the time, I was working at the library shelving books, and I came across a book about a teenage girl with cancer. And it really hit me. I was like, oh, wow, teenagers my age get cancer? That's kind of crazy. I'd never known anybody with cancer, let alone anybody my age with cancer. So I checked out as many books as I could on pediatric oncology. That's cancer for children. So I checked out a bunch of books about it, and I was reading through them, fiction, nonfiction, biography, and I noticed a reoccurring theme that a lot of these teenagers and sometimes children were just really depressed, bitter, no positive emotions at all. A lot of it was just this is woe is me, I have this terrible illness, and it is a terrible illness. But I just remember thinking like, wow, they don't have to be hopeless and bitter. I just have to get the love of Christ to them. I have to get the hope of Christ to people like this, because I just know they don't have to feel this way. Yeah. So the Lord laid it on my heart. I was like, okay, I really want to work in pediatric oncology. So I started making that known anytime anybody would ask me, like, what do you want to do? I'd say, well, I want to work in pediatric oncology. And after explaining what those words meant to people, they'd be like, oh, well, that's kind of just sad. That's kind of just depressing. Like, why would you want to do that? And I was starting to get kind of like down. I was like, yeah, why would I want to do that? If I tried to share the gospel with, say, a teenager going through cancer and be like, well, you don't have to be sad, like, because Jesus, you can be happy. I knew I would be faced with comments like, well, how could you possibly understand what I'm going through? How could you say that when you don't understand what it's like? So after thinking about that, later that night, I prayed a prayer that I think definitely changed my life forever. I prayed and I said, Lord, if this is what you want me to do, and I believe it is, please help me to understand what these teens are going through. So fast forward, again, several months after that, I'm getting a lot of hints. I'm like seeing a lot of things on TV about teenagers with cancer, and I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I saw a special on TV about this kid who had cancer in his knee. I was like, interesting. I was playing soccer at the time, and I started to get really unique pain in my left leg. And I kind of just thought, I was like, maybe because I did pray that prayer, but I don't know. You know, when you pray for outlandish things, you don't always expect the Lord to let those outlandish things happen. So I had this pain in my leg. So we go to the doctor, and he orders an MRI, and he calmly brought me and my mom in and let us know that I had a very aggressive form of bone cancer. And in my head, I was just like, okay, this is real this time. I'm not imagining it. I actually have cancer. It's go time. This is my mission. I can't believe the Lord followed through on this prayer. I wish I told my parents I had prayed that thing, because when they heard that news, they weren't as like gun-ho as I was. I don't want to, I'll save that for later. So back to the part about us moving randomly to Virginia. So he gave us this news: I have bone cancer in my left leg, stage 4, because it had metastasized to my lungs. The doctor said, you need a very extensive and specialized surgery that is only done at MCV VCU, which is up in Richmond, or Duke. And I didn't think about this till a long time after that. We don't even know how my dad got this job over here, but I don't even want to think about what would have happened if I'd been stuck in Colorado and been needing that surgery. So that's the Lord's planning, the Lord's sovereignty, and I'm so grateful. Amen. So I went in to have not just that surgery, but we were fighting today over how many surgeries I actually ended up having. 7 more surgeries in addition to that one, as well as 30-ish chemotherapy treatments. Again, I don't remember, because after like the 10th chemo, your brain just stops working. So it was somewhere around 30 chemotherapy treatments. I wasn't afraid of ever dying, and I remember coming in to Pastor Dan Gray's office, just because he wanted to talk to me and make sure I was doing okay. And he was like, are you sad? I was like, yes, I'm sad. He's like, are you angry? And I was like, no, I'm not angry. He said, are you scared of dying? I was like, I'm not scared of dying, because I have this mission. I knew I was going to live, because the Lord allowed me to go through this so that I could help other teenagers who had cancer. So I was never afraid of dying, though unbeknownst to me until a few years ago, my family was like, yeah, well, you did almost die like twice. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I was never afraid. But I don't want you guys to think that all that was easy. It was very, very difficult, and I sacrificed a lot of my body parts in order to live. And when you're a teenager, everything's embarrassing. So being like gray and skinny and with no hair, it's like extra embarrassing. But it just made all the relationships in my life just so much sweeter. When you become sick as a teenager, when you're trying to get away from your parents and your family, it just brings you a lot closer to them. And I think our relationship with my parents and my brother is just a lot stronger because of it. And there's just this sweetness that I think, unless a lot of people have gone through some really difficult times, a sweetness with the Lord that you just wouldn't normally get when you just feel like there's nothing else but God and no one else but God. I just can't describe it, but I'm grateful. So we'll fast forward again to now. I have my degree in psychology because I really want to be a counselor to children and teenagers and their families who are going through cancer and chronic diseases and things like that. I don't want to be a biblical counselor because that's a title you can have. I hope to just get my PhD in clinical or counseling psychology, just because I was telling Pastor that it would be awesome to be able to minister to the brothers and sisters. It's more my burden to share the gospel with people who just don't have it, especially during a time in their life when they're so tender and they're looking for hope and they're looking for anything. Because when your child gets sick, I don't know how people, or when you yourself get sick, I don't know how people do it without the Lord. And so that's really what my main goal is, my main passion is. And so it is a PhD program, and remember that part that I said about chemotherapy and doing bad things to your brain? So it's going to be really hard to get into a PhD program because just what the chemo has done to my brain. So if I get in, you guys will know that that was the Lord. I'm making like it public right now that I know He's going to, help me get in. So I just hope, I know I kind of rambled or maybe was a little bit too casual, but I hope this blessed or encouraged you guys in some way. I know I don't deserve to be used by the Lord in this way or deserve to have a testimony like this, but I am really grateful, and I just always want to give all the honor and glory to God always.
Amen.